Dore Gold is a senior foreign policy advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He is also a former Israeli ambassador to the UN. Ambassador Gold, this was an attack at a synagogue, a place of worship, different than recent attacks in Israel, which were not in religious locations. Does this shock you?
Well, to a large extent, what happened today in Jerusalem with the attack on the synagogue, with the murder of 4 rabbis, is somewhat reminiscent of events in the general region that we're living in the Middle East. You're seeing churches attacked and burned. You're seeing Shiite mosques also assaulted. And you're seeing clergy attacked elsewhere in the region. So it seems like a pattern of thinking, the inspiration that exists among ISIS, Nusra Front, and other groups nearby has begun to penetrate part of the Palestinian society. We know, for example, that young people go to the websites, they look at YouTubes of what ISIS is doing, the mass murders they commit. I mean, look at this attack. Not only was it in a religious site, but the terrorists show up with an axe and with a butcher knife, and they use it as a weapon. Now, what does that remind you of? It reminds you of Brits and Americans who have been beheaded in the Syrian desert.
When you look at the attack scene, and I want to warn viewers, this is a very graphic scene, a horrific thing to look at. I want to show it, though, so people understand what happened. That is a butcher knife. It has blood on it. That is after this horrific attack today. This story was not a sudden suicide bombing. How do you fight against this new kind of terror? You can't just put a metal detector in the front of a synagogue and stop this sort of thing.
When Mahmoud Abbas talks to the Palestinian people and says he wants to avoid a situation where there's Jewish contamination of the Temple Mount, how can you talk that way? How can you be a person who's addressed by Secretary Kerry as a man of peace and talk about Jews contaminating the Temple Mount? So first and foremost, the Palestinian leadership has to move back from this kind of language, and it's being systematically used, and it's affecting the minds of young people.
That language is horrible. But Prime Minister Netanyahu today also said something that has upset some. He said, look, he's going to destroy the homes of the people who are responsible for this horrific terror attack. That, of course, will hurt others who are innocent who may live in those homes. It is standard operating procedure for the Israeli government, I understand, but these attacks have been actually escalating. So what do you gain from destroying their homes?
Well, you have to also understand the context in which all this is occurring. First of all, Israel is a country of law, and everything that goes on in terms of our military operations is under the oversight of the Israeli Supreme Court. But more importantly, and perhaps specifically to your question, we have a problem where the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, frankly, with the backing of Qatar and Iran, are incentivizing terrorism. If you want to get a let's say, a salary for life or for many years, if you engage in terrorism against Israelis, you'll be given that salary. You can sit in an Israeli prison, you'll get that money. And that money is coming through the Palestinian Authority. So if you're incentivizing, we have to create a disincentive. And that's exactly what this type of punishment tries to do. It's difficult, it's hard to hear about, but it's absolutely necessary. It's an emergency condition, and it works.
There were major celebrations in Gaza today following the attack. Some Palestinians believe that the killings were justified, and they believe that because they say that the killing of the rabbis was in response to a Palestinian bus driver that they say was lynched by Israeli Jews. Israeli police say that that man hung himself, that it was suicide. Do you know that for sure?
100% it was suicide. And you know something? The family was allowed to pick a pathologist who could look at the body and make his own determination. So there were Israeli pathologists who looked at that Palestinian body, and there was a Palestinian pathologist. And everyone was in agreement that this was a suicide. This was not something caused by somebody shooting him, somebody dragging him out and choking him. This came about because of a suicide, and there's just absolutely no question about it. But what is part of this whole process of incitement? It's taking false rumors, spreading them that have no basis. It's like saying Israel wants to undermine the foundations of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Come on. This has been an old myth thrown around since the times of the Mufti of Jerusalem in the 1920s.
All right, Dore Gold, thank you very much, Ambassador.
Sure.